For years, Vladimir Putin looked untouchable, but the most dangerous moment for any powerful leader is not when the world attacks from outside. It is when the walls inside the system start cracking one by one, quietly at first, and then all at once. What is happening now is not just one political problem, or one lost ally, or one bad headline, because this looks more like a slow collapse of influence, credibility, and control spreading across several regions at the same time. And when a leader begins losing friends abroad, pressure at home usually becomes even harder to hide, because every weakness outside the country eventually comes back as fear, frustration, and instability inside it. Before we move forward, I want to say something. I put a lot of effort into researching and analyzing this news for you, but many of you don't like, subscribe, or share the videos. I also take the time to reply to all your comments, yet I still don't see much response, which honestly feels disappointing. So I have a small request. Please support my main channel, Market Mindset, and also follow my backup channel, Market Mindset 2. The biggest reason this story matters is not simply because of what happened in one place, but because the pattern is spreading, and once a power network starts losing its pillars, the fall usually does not happen in one dramatic moment. It happens in stages. Hungary is one of those stages because a major political shift there changes how Russia can influence Europe from within, and that is why this development is being watched so closely by every serious analyst. For a long time, Hungary acted like a useful pressure point for Moscow inside the European system, slowing certain decisions, softening some policies, and giving Russia room to breathe while the war in Ukraine continued. But when that type of internal protection begins to disappear, the damage is bigger than it first looks, because Russia is not just losing a friend. It is losing a place from which it could weaken the response against it. That is why the shift in Hungary is not just an election story. It is a strategic rupture, because every blocked decision, every delayed package, and every weakened sanction helped shape the battlefield far beyond Hungary's borders. And when that obstacle starts fading, the balance changes immediately, because Ukraine gains more support, Europe gains more unity, and Moscow loses one of the quieter tools it used to slow the pressure around it. But Hungary is only one part of a much larger picture, because the deeper story is that Russia's international network is no longer behaving like a strong alliance system. It is looking more like a chain of weak links under stress. In Latin America, Moscow once tried to build influence through long-term political partnerships, energy interests, military cooperation, and anti-Western messaging, but that kind of influence only works while the local government remains aligned and stable. Once that support weakens or disappears, the entire structure begins to collapse because the port access, the diplomatic leverage, and the economic footprint that took years to build can vanish much faster than people expect. That is what makes this situation so dangerous for Putin, because every region that once gave Russia a door into another part of the world is now becoming harder to hold, harder to control, and harder to defend. The Middle East has been even more painful, because Russia spent years presenting itself as a protector of allied regimes, a military backer, and a force that could preserve governments under pressure. But that image has suffered serious damage. When an ally falls, the message is bigger than the event itself, because everyone else watching starts asking the same question. If Moscow could not protect them, why would it protect us later? That question is deadly in geopolitics, because trust is a currency, and once it starts breaking, even loyal partners begin acting more carefully, more selfishly, and more independently. Iran is another example of that pressure, because whatever the short-term coordination may have been, the larger reality is that this relationship is now under strain. And strain in wartime alliances often exposes who is truly dependable and who is only useful on paper. If one side cannot provide full protection, and the other side cannot guarantee strong support, then what remains is not an alliance in the classic sense. It is a fragile exchange of convenience under fear. That fragility matters a great deal, because Russia has leaned heavily on outside supply chains, outside energy partners, outside military assistance, and outside political cover to keep the war machine moving. And when those external supports weaken, the pressure does not stay abroad, because it comes straight back into the factories, the logistics chains, the front lines, and the internal economy that must carry the burden. The South Caucasus is another region where the pressure is becoming impossible to ignore, because this area has long been treated as a buffer zone, a corridor, and a strategic bridge between Russia, the Middle East, and Central Asia. That is why any change in Armenia matters far more than a normal diplomatic dispute, because it affects military positioning, trade routes, energy routes, and the broader architecture of influence across the region. When a country that once leaned toward Moscow begins speaking more openly about independence, democracy, and self-determination, it does not just create embarrassment for the Kremlin, it challenges the whole model of control. A system built on dependency does not like partners who start thinking for themselves, because independence is contagious, and once one state breaks away mentally, others start imagining the same path for themselves. That is why the Armenian shift is so important, because it signals that Moscow's old playbook, divide, pressure, dominate, and mediate, is no longer working the way it used to. Meanwhile, in Georgia and other post-Soviet spaces, public mood and political frustration can also become dangerous for the Kremlin, because once people see that resistance is possible, they begin to question whether fear is still necessary. And that is how geopolitical dominoes fall, not always through tanks and headlines, but through a gradual change in expectation, where countries start believing that Moscow is not invincible anymore. Ukraine remains the central battlefield in all of this, because the war there did not just consume troops and equipment, it consumed the image of Russian power, and that image was one of the main foundations of Putin's authority. Every lost kilometer, every stretched supply line, every burned vehicle, and every exhausted battalion sends the same message that a long war can drain even the strongest-looking state when the front becomes too wide and the cost becomes too high. This is why military pressure and political pressure cannot be separated, because battlefield setbacks weaken the state, and a weakened state becomes more vulnerable to international losses, domestic unrest, and elite anxiety. At home, the story is no calmer because when sanctions bite, prices rise, and public patience shrinks, the government has to decide whether to protect stability or tighten control, and often it tries to do both at the same time. But that creates another problem, because censorship can hide anger for a while, yet it cannot erase the reasons for that anger, and eventually people begin feeling the gap between official confidence and daily reality. That gap is where systems begin to crack, because the public sees one story on television and another story in shops, salaries, family budgets, and the cost of simply getting through the month. When trust in the government weakens, even a powerful propaganda machine starts losing effectiveness, because repetition cannot fully cover exhaustion, and exhaustion is often the first visible sign of political decay. A leader can survive criticism for a long time, but it becomes much harder to survive when even the loyal voices start sounding nervous, cautious, or openly frustrated in public. That matters more than it may seem, because when supporters begin admitting that the economy is slowing, the war is expensive, and the burden is growing, the entire mood of inevitability begins to fade. At that point, the regime is no longer just fighting enemies abroad. It is fighting the reality inside its own borders, and reality is a far more stubborn opponent than any rival state. The deeper danger is that isolation multiplies every other problem, because a country with fewer allies must spend more energy protecting itself, more money replacing lost support, and more force managing its own decline. That is why the loss of outside partnerships is not just symbolic, it is operational, because the absence of supplies, diplomatic backing, strategic depth, and regional influence directly affects war capacity. If military aid becomes harder to secure, if political cover disappears, and if trade routes become more restricted, then even a large state begins to feel small in ways that matter on the ground. And once that feeling spreads, the people closest to power begin changing too, because elites are usually the first to notice when a system is moving from confidence to uncertainty. They do not need a public collapse to sense it, because they can read the pressure in markets, the tension in ministries, the tone of propaganda, the mood of the public, and the behavior of foreign partners. That is why a government under pressure often becomes more defensive, more reactive, and more suspicious, because every loss abroad makes it fear a challenge at home. But defensive power is not the same as durable power, and history shows that leaders who retreat into fear often make the system smaller, harsher, and ultimately weaker. The crucial question now is not whether Putin still has power, because he clearly does, but whether that power is still expanding, or whether it is now trapped in a cycle of maintenance and damage control. If power is only being preserved through fear, censorship, and shrinking circles of loyalists, then the state may still look strong from a distance while becoming fragile at the center. That fragility could produce several outcomes, the first being a hardening of control, where the government responds to every loss with tighter censorship, more pressure, and even more aggressive messaging. A second possibility is strategic retreat, where Moscow tries to reduce exposure, preserve what it can, and quietly accept that it no longer controls every region it once treated as its own sphere. A third outcome is internal strain becoming impossible to hide, where economic pressure, military fatigue, and elite fear start interacting in a way that changes the political atmosphere more quickly than outsiders expect. And that is the part people often miss. Because the greatest threat to a declining power is not one dramatic defeat, it is the accumulated effect of many smaller defeats happening at the same time. A lost ally here, a failed influence campaign there, a weakened corridor, a strained economy, a tired public, and a nervous elite can together create a crisis much larger than any single event. That is why this moment feels so important, because it is not just about one headline or one country. It is about whether an old imperial style of influence can survive in a world that is increasingly resisting it. If the answer is no, then we are watching the slow end of a model, not just the struggle of one man, and that makes the story much bigger than politics alone. It becomes a lesson in how power actually decays, not suddenly, but layer by layer, until the structure still exists on paper while the real control has already started slipping away. And that is what makes these developments so closely watched. Because when a state begins losing its ability to project confidence abroad, the consequences usually appear at home sooner or later. The final stage is not always a collapse. Sometimes it is something quieter and more dangerous. A long period where the leadership is still standing but no longer fully steering the direction of events. That is the hidden risk in this story, because the world often focuses on visible battles, while the more important struggle is happening inside alliances, economies, institutions, and public trust. Once those foundations begin moving, every new event lands harder, every setback feels larger, and every loyal voice starts sounding a little less certain than before. So the real question is not whether Russia is still powerful today, because it is, but whether that power is now entering the phase where survival matters more than dominance. And when a leader begins fighting mainly to hold together what is left, history teaches us that the most dangerous part of the journey has already begun. If you look at the full picture, from Hungary to the Middle East, from the Caucasus to the Baltic region, the pattern is no longer easy to deny, because the network that once surrounded Moscow is shrinking. Every region that slips away makes the next one harder to hold, and every loss changes the psychology of the remaining allies, who are now watching more carefully than ever. That is the true story here, not just territory, not just diplomacy, but confidence collapsing in slow motion across an entire geopolitical system. And once confidence is gone, even the strongest looking fortress can begin to feel like it is standing on borrowed time. So the next chapter will depend on whether Moscow can rebuild trust, restore leverage, and stabilize its home front, or whether these losses continue to stack until the pressure becomes impossible to manage. For now, the warning signs are impossible to ignore, because isolation is not just a political condition, it is often the beginning of a far more serious decline. Put simply, this is what the world should be watching right now, not just one event, but the chain reaction that could follow it. Because when dominoes start falling in geopolitics, the final fall is usually the one everyone claims they did not see coming. So the real question is this: how many more pieces can the system lose before the structure itself begins to fail? And when that moment comes, the story will not be about one man's strength anymore. It will be about how long a collapsing empire can pretend it is still rising.